We shall start our discussion of a new topic called calculation of YTM. YTM means yield to maturity. For this purpose, we will be discussing the following important subtopics. One is what is the meaning of debt, what are the terms associated with bonds, what is the cost of debt capital, what are the theorems of bond valuation, then what is called duration of bond, how to compute the duration of bond, what are the properties of duration, and how is the bond price volatile, what is the reasons for the volatility of the bond price. So first of all, let us start with the concept of debt. As you know, a sum of money due by certain and express agreement by the entity is called a debt. That means whenever a company or an entity borrows money either from a bank or from the public, such money is known as debt. So debt is a claim for money. So normally loans from banks, financial institutions are some of the popular forms of debt. And bonds and debentures are also called some forms of debt. They are typically borrowings from the public direct instead of from the intermediaries like banks and financial institutions. So as we know, debt holders, whether they are banks or whether they are financial institutions or public, are entitled to receive periodic payments in the form of interest and the principal at the end of a particular period known as the maturity period. So this is the obligation of the entity which is borrowing money to pay back the principal at the end of the maturity period as well as periodic interest as per the agreed terms. It is defined as a claim of money owing by the entity to the outsider. But in terms of risk, debt is considered to be less risky as compared to equity. Because in the case of debt, there are certain advantages which are not available in the case of equity. For one, debt is certain, that means the outgo of interest payments on debt is certain, that means the amount is certain, they do not have to pay anything more than what is agreed, and moreover such payments are tax deductible, that means the entity gets advantage of taxation on the interest they pay, unlike the dividends they pay on equity. And moreover, equity shareholders always have high expectations because of the risk they take. So the cost of equity is generally considered to be higher than the cost of debt, and therefore debt is considered preferable in some respects to equity. So whenever debt is issued by the entities, normally by the companies to the public at large, they are always issued in the form of either debentures or bonds. Normally these words are interchangeable. So in some cases it is called debentures, in some cases they could be called bonds, but bond is the normal term now used in the case of debt taken by the companies from the public. So we have to be familiar with certain terms which are associated with the bond. So let us try to understand each of these terms, what do they mean. One is called the face value. This is the value stated on the face of the bond. It is also known as the par value. If the bond is issued, let us say for 100 rupees, 100 is called the face value of the bond. It can be issued at the same rate at which it is mentioned on the bond, that means at the face value, or it can be issued at a price higher than the face value of the bond, or it can be issued at a price lower than the face value of the bond. So if it is issued at a price higher than the face value, it is known as a premium bond, that means a little extra premium is paid on the purchase of such bonds. If it is issued at a price lesser than the face value, it is known as a discount bond, that means a percentage of amount is given as discount to the buyer of the bond. Then we have another term known as coupon rate. This is the specific rate of interest payable to the bond holders. It is always mentioned on the face of the bond. If it is a 8% bond, that means 8% interest is payable to the bond holders periodically. That period of course could be either half yearly or yearly, and in any case it is a contract between the debt holder and the company which is borrowing. Maturity is another term. This is the end of the period when the principal amount has to be repaid. So, this is the period up to which the entity can keep the money which they have borrowed, and at the end of that they have to pay back the money to the bondholder. Then redemption value is the amount which the bondholder gets on maturity. Bonds can be redeemed at par or at a discount or at a premium. That means at the end of the maturity period, whatever the money has been invested by the bondholder is generally returned to him. Either it could be returned in the same way, that means if he has invested 1000 rupees, he could be getting 1000 rupees back, or he could be given a slightly more amount than the face value of the bond, in which case it is called bonds redeemed at a premium. That means he will get some extra money in addition to what he has invested, or they can be redeemed at a discount also, in which case he will get slightly less than the face value of the bond. So, in such cases they are known as redemption at a discount. Then the market value of the bond is the value at which the bond is bought and sold in the market. This is the market price. Normally, most of the bonds issued are also sold and bought in the secondary market through the stock exchanges. In such cases, the prices vary periodically, and the price at which they are sold on a particular day is known as the market value of the bond on that particular day. So, before we go to other things, we will have to find out what is the cost of debt capital. As I have stated earlier, cost is considered less, the debt is considered less costly compared to equity. So, we have to find out how cost can be calculated in the case of debt. Normally, the cost is always the discount rate at which the future values of the cash flows which are likely to accrue on the bond are discounted, and that amount becomes equal to the present value of the bond. So, it is the discount rate at which the future cash flows, if discounted, equal the present value of the bond. So, for the purpose of discounting the future cash flows, we have to first identify what are the different cash flows connected with the bond. Normally, as you know, in the case of bonds, interest payments are made periodically. So, interest payment is a periodic cash flow which the bondholder will get. In addition to that, he will get the redemption value at the end of the maturity of the bond. Therefore, all the stream of interest payments made by the entity, that is cash flows which periodically the bondholder gets, as well as the redemption value, have to be discounted by using the discount factor which is known as the cost of debt capital. So, let the cost of debt capital be KD. So, in which case the present value of each of the cash flows can be done by dividing the cash flow by 1 plus KD raised to the number of years after which the cash flow is being received. Since the cash flows are being received at regular intervals, it can be put in the form as sigma 1 upon 1 plus KD raised to T into I, that is I is the interest payment which the bondholder will get periodically, plus the redemption value also has to be discounted. So, that will be treated as F divided by 1 plus KD raised to N, where F is the redemption value. Therefore, the value of the bond, which is also called the intrinsic value of the bond, is treated as equal to sigma 1 upon 1 plus KD raised to T into I plus F divided by 1 plus KD raised to N. So, this is the formula for calculation of the intrinsic value of the bond, where KD is called the cost of debt capital. This is how cost of debt capital is stated. Once you know the cost of debt capital, you can also find out the intrinsic value of the bond. So, either way, given some of the variables, one variable can be calculated. So, bond interest payments can be of two types. Normally, it can be either annual interest payments or it can be semi-annual interest payments. Normally, in the case of government bonds, the interest payments are at semi-annual interest, that means at half-yearly intervals the interest is paid, in which case there will be cash flows occurring every half year. So, the equation can be put in a different manner to take into account the cash flows which come every 6 months. So, in which case every 6 months there should be discounted to arrive at the present value. So, the equation can be put as VO is equal to sigma I upon 2 whole divided by 1 plus KD by 2 raised to T plus F divided by 1 plus KD by 2 raised to 2n, where you can notice from the earlier equation that KD has been taken as KD by 2 because we are taking semi-annual interest, and similarly I has become I by 2 where I is the annual interest payment. Since we are taking half yearly, it will become I by 2. I by 2 is equal to the interest which they get every half year, and n has become 2n because the number of periods has gone up from n to 2n. If n is the total number of years, then the total number of half years will be obviously 2n. So, this is called the bond value with semi-annual interest. So, whenever you are asked to calculate bond value with semi-annual interest, you have to use this formula. And in addition to interest or what we call coupon payments on bonds, certain other terms are regularly used in the case of bonds. One is called the current yield, the other is the yield to maturity, normally known as YTM of a bond. So, in the case of a current yield is always calculated by using the formula coupon interest divided by current market price. That means it is the cash flow which you are getting in terms of interest divided by what you have actually invested, because you have invested at the current market price, your actual yield will may be less than the interest which you are receiving or maybe more than the interest you are receiving depending on the market price, which is either more than the face value or less than the face value. For example, let us say a bond has a coupon interest of 10% and the face value of the bond is 1000 rupees. That means you will be getting interest of 10% on 1000 rupees periodically, that is you will be getting interest of 100 rupees every year. Let us say you did not buy this bond initially, but you went to the market and bought this bond for 1100 rupees and the price of the value of the bond had gone up. So, on 1100 rupees investment, what you will be getting as interest will remain 100 only, because interest is always calculated on the face value of the bond. So, your actual yield will be, which we call the current yield, will be 100 divided by 1100, which will be less than 10%. So, what we get here is, as the price of the bond increases in the market, the yield will keep going down because you will be investing more money to receive the same interest payments as denoted by the coupon. And the inverse is true if the bond prices are less than the face value. For example, if you had bought the same bond at 900 rupees, your current yield will be 100 rupees of interest which you will be receiving on the face value of 1000 divided by 900, which will work out to more than 11%. So, your current yield will be 11% as against the coupon rate of 10% if the bond value is 900, and your current yield will be less than 10%, that is around 9%, if the bond value is more than the face value, that is 1100 rupees. So, that is an inverse relationship between current yield and the bond price. Now, we will go to the next concept called yield to maturity, normally known as the YTM of a bond. This is defined as the internal rate of return or the discount rate, which makes the stream of future cash flows equal to the present market value of the bond. So, here it is an indirect way of finding the discount rate. So, what you have to do is, you have to take the present market value of the bond and keep it on the left hand side, and then take all the streams of cash flows which the bond will be yielding, that is in terms of interest payments as well as redemption value, and that has to be discounted at a rate which makes the right hand side equal to the left hand side. So, this is the same thing which we do while calculating the IRR of any stream of cash flows. So, this is always done by means of a trial and error, and that rate which we get is called the yield to maturity. In other words, yield to maturity can be defined as the yield which you will be getting if you hold the bond till maturity. What would be your net yield if you keep the bond till maturity. That is the meaning of the yield to maturity. So there are various theorems on the bond value. So you have to understand as to how these coupon rates, then the cost of equity or the cost of debt, the bond value keep on changing, and what is the relation between the market value of the bond and the cost of debt. This can be seen by looking at what happens whenever bond prices go up or whenever bond prices go down, or whenever interest rates in the market go up or down. So we will consider different theorems. The first theorem says, is in case of a situation where the required rate of return, normally denoted by KD, is equal to the coupon rate. That means what you expect from the bond is the same as the coupon rate. That means if the coupon rate is say 10% and your expectation is also 10%, then what should be the bond value? Normally, obviously, bond value will be equal to the par value. That means if the bond is for a face value of 1000, you would like to buy it only at 1000, then only you will get the same return as you would get if the return has been exactly 10%. So therefore, bond value will always be equal to par value whenever the required rate of return is equal to the coupon rate. But second theorem is, you change the required rate of return. That means if your rate is more than what the coupon rate indicates, that means you want to get more out of the bond than what is stated on the face of the bond. Let us say your return is 12% as against a coupon rate of 10%. That means bond is giving you only 10% on the face value. Then at what price should you buy it? Obviously, if you want to get a higher return, you have to buy it at a rate lower than the face value. If you buy it at 1000, then interest you will be getting only 100, because interest is always calculated on the face value. Therefore, you have to buy it at a lesser amount so that your required rate of return will be more than 10%, that is 12%. Therefore, in such cases, bond values are always lower than the par values. That means they are always traded at a discount. That is, the market price of the bond will be less than the face value of the bond. And the opposite is true if the required rate of return is less than the coupon rate. Let us say the coupon rate is 10% and you want only 8%. Then what happens to the bond value? Then you don't mind paying more than the face value of the bond, because what you expect is only 8%. So you can go up to even 1200 rupees. On 1200 rupees, if you buy, you will still be getting 100 rupees interest on the face value of 1000. So your yield will be around 8%. So the bond value will always be greater than the par value. So when the required rate of return is less than the coupon rate, bond value is always greater than the par value. So this can be applied to the market situation. What happens in the market? Normally when interest rates start going up in the market, then your required rate of return also keeps going up. If the market interest rates are going up, naturally you would expect more return on your investments. So in such cases, you would like to buy the bonds at a lesser value because your required rate of return has gone up. So normally bond prices start going down whenever interest rates in the market keep going up, and exactly the opposite is true when the interest rates start falling down, when bond prices start going up. And another situation is, what happens to the discount on the bond? In terms of prices we have seen, now we can see the same thing in terms of discount on the bond. When the required rate of return is greater than the coupon rate, then the discount on the bond declines as maturity approaches. So even if the requirement is more than the coupon rate, the discount on the bond will keep on becoming less and less as we approach maturity, because as it approaches maturity, then the value of the bond will keep on going up, because the coupon rate is already given and your expectation is more, so the discount will go down. And the same thing happens when the required rate of return is less than the coupon rate. That is what we call theorem 5. Then premium on the bond declines as maturity approaches. So if you can see that in the case of discount, it keeps declining. That means we keep reaching the par value as maturity approaches, and similarly when the required rate of return is less than the coupon rate, then the premium which is above the face value also start declining. So in both cases the discount and the premium both start declining as we reach maturity, so that at the end of the period it will be exactly the par value or the face value of the bond, because at the end of maturity or almost nearing maturity, nobody would like to buy the bond at a price higher than the face value or lower than the face value, because that is what he is going to receive on maturity. So it approaches the face value as maturity approaches. And theorem number 6 is the relation between bond value and YTM. So as we have already seen, the yield to maturity and bond value are inversely related. So the relationship is given as bond value is proportional to 1 upon YTM, that is inversely proportional. As YTM goes up, bond value declines. Similarly, as bond value goes up, YTM declines. So that is an inverse relationship between bond value and YTM. And theorem number 7 says, given difference between YTM and coupon rate. If there is a difference between YTM and coupon rate, what happens? Then the larger the term to maturity, greater is the price change with a change in YTM. If you are far away from the maturity of the bond, then greater will be the price change with a change in ATM. If YTM changes, let us say by 1%, the price will change by more than 1%. That is the meaning of this. That means whenever the maturity period of the bond is far away, then this will happen. And in the case of a given maturity, that is theorem number 8, bond price change will be greater with a decrease in bonds YTM than the change in bond price with an equal increase in bonds YTM. So what happens here is, there are two things here. One is the change of the bond price with a decrease in bonds YTM. So there bond price change will be greater than the decrease in the bonds YTM. That means if YTM declines by 1%, bond price may go up by more than 1%. And this difference will be greater than the change in bond price with an equal increase in bonds YTM. So on the other hand, if YTM goes up by 1%, the bond price will go down by more than 1%. But the extent of change when the bond price is going down will be lesser than the extent of change when the bond prices start going up with the decrease in bonds YTM. And for a given change in YTM, the percentage price changes in case of high coupon bonds will be smaller than in case of low coupon bonds. So for example, let us say the change in YTM is 1%. So you can think of two bonds, one having a high coupon rate, that let us say a bond with 10% rate, and a coupon with a low coupon rate, that is 8%. So the percentage price change in the case of high coupon bonds will be smaller. So whenever YTM changes, let us say by 1%, 10% bond will change to a lesser extent than the change in the bonds of 8%. That is the meaning of percentage price changes in case of high coupon bonds will be smaller than in case of low coupon bonds. And the last theorem is change in YTM. What happens with the change in YTM? It affects bonds with a higher YTM more than it does bonds with a lower YTM. So whenever there is a change in YTM, the bonds which are having higher YTM, that means they are already having a higher yield to maturity, they will be affected more than those bonds which have got a lower YTM, that is which have a lower yield to maturity. So this is the theorems on bond value. So most of the trading in the market in respect of bonds is done keeping in mind these things. Suffice it to say that any changes happening in the market in terms of interest rates will have a direct impact on the market values of the bonds, on the current yields, and also on the yield to maturity of the bonds. So depending on that, the prices of bonds will keep on varying, and this has to be kept in mind whenever one has to deal in the purchase and sale of bonds. So now we will consider another important concept which is normally used in the case of bonds, called the duration of the bond. The duration of the bond is nothing to do with the maturity of the bond, that is a different term. Maturity of the bond means the period on completion of which the bond has to be, the principal on the bond has to be repaid to the investors, whereas duration of the bond is a different concept. So here, before we try to understand what is the meaning of duration, we will understand the concept of risk in the case of a bond. So as we know, investors in the case of bonds are subject to interest rate risk on two counts. There is an interest rate risk. One is the reinvestment of annual interest, and second is the capital gain loss on sale of bond at the end of the holding period. So what is the risk here? For example, let us say a bond holder gets periodically interest. Let us say he gets interest annually, and this interest has to be reinvested again. But the investor may not get the same return which he is getting on the bond if this amount is reinvested. So there is always a risk of reinvestment of the annual interest account, because in the meantime situation could have changed. So the investor is exposed to what is called interest rate risk. If the interest rates in the economy have gone down in the meantime, then the investors cannot do anything but invest the interest which he has received only at a lesser rate of interest. That means he is taking some amount of risk. And the opposite happens if interest rates are on the rise in the market, in which case he can reinvest the amount at a higher rate of interest. So this kind of volatility in the reinvestment returns is known as the reinvestment risk. And second is, he does not know at what value the redemption can be done at the end of the holding period. That means his holding period need not necessarily match with the maturity period. In the case of maturity period, he knows how much money he is going to get in, but suppose he buys it after 2 years after the bonds are issued and wants to sell it, let us say after 3 years, though the maturity of the bond is 10 years, in which case he does not know at what price it will give him. He can sell the bond after 3 years. The price may have gone up, price may have gone down. So he may end up with a capital gain or he may end up with a capital loss. So there is volatility, that means there is a variability of the expected capital gain loss, and this gives rise to the risk. So these are the two risks which an investor is normally subjected to. So as I have said, whenever there is interest rate rising, there is a gain on reinvestment and a loss on liquidation. So what happens? Whenever interest rates go up, whatever money is receiving as interest, he can reinvest them at a higher rate of interest. So his returns will be slightly higher. But what happens to the value of the bond? Value of the bond goes down. As we have seen, whenever the interest rates in the market go up, the value of the bonds start going down. So if he liquidates them in such a scenario, there will be more capital loss or less capital gain. So whatever he gains on account of the reinvestment of the interest, he will be losing on liquidation of the investment. And same thing happens whenever interest rates falls. So in the case of interest rate falling, there will be loss on reinvestment, because he will have to reinvest whatever interest he receives at a lesser rate of interest, but he will be gaining on liquidation because the bond values keep rising whenever interest rates start falling. So what happens? These two kinds of risk are opposite in nature. That means one where he gains, in the other he starts losing. So there could be a time when these two can exactly match each other, and this kind of period where whatever he gains on reinvestment is exactly matched by whatever he loses on liquidation, or vice versa, that is whatever he loses on reinvestment is exactly made up by whatever he gains on liquidation. When these two are equal, such a period is known as the duration of the bond. So duration of the bond can be defined as the holding period for which there are no interest rate risks. That means interest rate risk is reduced to zero, because whatever he gains on account of reinvestment of the interest payments is exactly compensated by the loss in the value of the bond on liquidation or vice versa. So, this concept was first introduced by one person known as Macaulay, and therefore, it is also called the Macaulay duration. So, duration has become a very important concept. So, if you want not to take any risk in the investment of bonds, you should know what is the duration of that particular bond, so that you can buy the bond and hold it exactly for that duration. Let us say there is a bond of maturity of 10 years and you are buying it after 3 years, and if you calculate and find out that the duration of the bond from today after 3 years is exactly 4 years, that means you buy the bond today and hold it exactly for 4 years, in which case you are reducing your interest rate risk to 0. That means whatever you are gaining on account of reinvestment will be exactly compensated by whatever you are losing on liquidation. So, this concept of duration of bond is used in trading of bonds in the market. So, for that you have to understand as to how to compute this duration of the bond. So, what are the steps needed to be done to compute this time period? First is determine the cash flows from holding the bond. So, what are the cash flows? When you hold the bond, the cash flows are obviously the interest payments from the period you buy the bond till the period you liquidate the bond. They are the cash flows. They could be interest payments annually or they could be interest payments semi-annually. And second is determine the PV, that is the present value of these cash flows by discounting the flows with discount rate. The discount rate is normally the yield to maturity. You know the yield to maturity, and try to find out the present value of all these cash flows of these interest payments by using the discount rate of YTM. Then multiply each of these PVs by the respective number of years left before the PV is received. So, what you have to do is, once the present values of each of these cash flows is found out, this has to be multiplied by the number of years left before the PV is received. Suppose you are calculating the present value of the cash flow receivable after 1 year. Let us say the present value comes to 100. So, in that case 100 has to be multiplied by 1, because this cash flow you are receiving after 1 year. This is the number of years left before you receive the cash flow. Let us say in the case of the interest payment which you are receiving after 2 years, let the PV, that is the present value, be 80. In that case, that 80 has to be multiplied by 2, because this cash flow you are receiving only after 2 years. So, in respect of all cash flows which you will be receiving, you have to multiply them by the number of years left before the actual cash flow is received. Then all these are added together, that is your multiplication of the PV with the number of years for each of the cash flows, then add up the entire thing. So, this can be denoted by sigma PV into T, where PV is the present value of each of the cash flows and T is the period left before the cash flow is received. And this entire thing is again divided by the PV to get the duration of the bond. Then you simply add up all the PVs without multiplying them with the number of years, and then that sum is known as sigma PV. So, if you do that, you get what is known as the duration of the bond. So, let us illustrate this with the help of a simple example. Let us take the example of a 12.5% bond having a face value of rupees 100, redeemable after 5 years at a premium of 5%, and the coupon payable at the end of each year. The expected market rate is 15%. So, here what they have given is, market rate is given 15%, that is the yield to maturity. That means you will be discounting all the cash flows at 15%, that is what you have to remember. And what are the cash flows? First you have to identify. So, in this case the face value of the bond is 100 and interest payments are made annually. That means on 100 rupees every year you will be receiving 12 rupee 50 paise for 5 years, because you are redeeming it after 5 years. So, 12.5 will be the cash flow every year. So, you find the present value of all these 5 cash flows of 12.5 by discounting it with the YTM of 15%. So, in the case of first it will be 12.5 divided by 1 plus 0.15 raised to 1, that will give you the value of the present value. Similarly, for the second year it will be 12.5 divided by 1 plus 0.15 raised to 2 and so on for 5 years. So, you have got the present values of all the cash flows. In addition to that, you will also be getting 100 rupees plus premium of 5% at the end of 5 years. That means your redemption value will be 105 and not 100 because this bond is redeemable at a premium. So, that also has to be converted to present value, that will be 105 divided by 1 plus 0.15 raised to 5. So, all these different present values of all the cash flow, that is 5 interest payment plus 1 redemption value, has to be multiplied by the number of years left for before the cash flow is received. So, in the case of first one, you multiply it with 1, in the case of 2 you multiply it with 2 and so on up to 5, then add up all of them, that will give you the figure of 375.11, that is the total of all the present values multiplied with the T and then summed up, and again only sum up the present values of all these 6 cash flows, that will come to 94.11. So, you divide 375.11 with 94.11, that will give you 3.99 years. That means the duration of the bond is 3.99 years. What it means is, you buy the bond today and hold the bond for 3.99 years, and when you sell it, you would have reduced your interest rate risk to 0. So, that means whatever risk you had on reinvestment of the interest receipts is compensated by whatever risk you have in the liquidation of the bond. So, that is the concept of duration of the bond. So, from this you can conclude as to what are the properties of the duration. So, we can sum them up as under. One is, duration is always less than the term to maturity. If the term to maturity of the bond is 10 years, the duration is always less than that. That means you have to hold the bond not up to maturity, but at a lesser period, so that the risk is reduced to 0. Then secondly, duration will be equal to its term to maturity if and only if it is ZCB. That means ZCB means zero coupon bond. Only in the case of a zero coupon bond, duration is always equal to maturity. So, in the case of zero coupon bonds, if you hold the bond till maturity, you would have reduced the interest rate risk to 0. In all other cases, the duration is always less than the term to maturity. That means in all other cases, you should hold the bond not up to maturity, but up to the duration of the bond. The duration of a perpetual bond is equal to 1 plus R divided by R, where R is the current yield of bond. So, in the case of a perpetual bond, that is a bond which will not be redeemed at all, which will continue to give you cash flows in terms of interest payments, the duration of the bond is calculated by the formula 1 plus R upon R, where R is the current yield of the bond. If say current yield of the bond is 10%, then this will be 1 plus 0.1 divided by 0.1, that will be the duration of the bond, that is 1.1 divided by 0.1, that will be around 11 years. So, in that case, after 11 years, you should be able to get your bond money back, because that is the duration of a perpetual bond. And the next property is, larger the bond's term to maturity, the greater the difference between its term to maturity and duration. That means, if the bond has got a larger maturity value, the difference between the maturity and the difference between the duration of the bond will be greater. That means, let us say the bond has a maturity of 100 years and the duration, let us say, is 15 years. So, the difference between the two is 85 years. But if you reduce the bond's maturity to say 10 years, then the duration of the bond, let us say, is 4 years. So, the difference will get reduced to 6 years. So, the difference will go on reducing as the maturity of the bond comes down, or in other words, as the duration of the bond increases, the maturity of the bond also increases at a faster rate. And next property of the duration is, duration and YTM are inversely related. That means, whenever duration goes up, YTM goes down, and if YTM goes up, duration will go down. The larger the coupon rate, the smaller the duration of a bond. If the coupon rate of the bond is larger, then the duration will be smaller. For example, if the coupon rate is 10% and the duration, let us say, is 4 years, if the coupon rate comes down to 8%, the duration of the bond will go up. and if the coupon rate goes up, the duration of the bond will go down. Similarly, an increase in the frequency of coupon payments decreases the duration and vice versa. So, instead of making annual payments, if the bond payments are semi-annual, that is half yearly, then the duration of the bond decreases, and if the payments become less frequent, that means instead of yearly payment, if the payment become once in 2 years, then the duration of the bond will go up. That means there is an inverse relationship between the increase in the frequency of coupon payment and decrease in the duration of the bond. And finally, duration of a bond declines as the bond approaches maturity. So, as we reach the maturity of the bond, then the duration keeps going down. So, initially when the bond is issued, duration will be higher, and as we start moving towards the maturity of the bond, the duration of the bond keeps declining. So, before concluding, we will take up the last concept under bond prices, that is called the bond price volatility, the change in the price of the bond in relation to the changes in the interest rates. This is called volatility of the bond, and as we know, bond prices and YTM are inversely related. As YTM goes down, bond prices go up, or vice versa, that is when bond prices go down, YTM goes up. So, the extent of change in the bond price for a change in YTM measures the interest rate risk of a bond. That means you take the change in the bond price divided by the change in the YTM, that will give you an idea of the interest rate risk. The higher this, the higher is the interest rate risk. The lower is this change, the lower will be the interest rate risk, and this is known as the elasticity of the bond, that is called the interest rate elasticity. It is defined as the percentage change in price in bond in period T divided by the percentage change in YTM for the bond, and this is always negative, because as we know, the bond price and the YTM are inversely related. If one goes up, another automatically comes down. Therefore, when you are dividing one change by the other, it is always be negative. So, elasticity is said to be negative, and it can be given by the formula I is equal to D into YTM whole divided by 1 plus ITM, where D is called the duration of the bond. So, this is another important concept which is used in the marketing of bonds and in the trading of bonds, where interest rate elasticity is seen as to what extent is the changes likely in the price of the bond given a change in the YTM.